So the basic. So working with MDF, the basics. I'll see you after this. So guys, yes, this video is going to be taking you through just the basics of MDF. I get asked regular, will the detail be filled in? The etching lines, how do you prime them? Do you have to treat them with PVA? I get asked this all the time, and I understand why. MDF Terrain's very attractive because it's very cheap. And because I'm doing this big 16x4 gaming table, there's an awful lot of terrain on there. And I'm going to be using a lot of MDF buildings. So this is going to be the absolute basics. And next week, we're going to go to absolute town. So I thought I'd throw this video together to show you that MDF Terrain is as simple as anything. And you don't have to be worried about it. We'll just take these off. Get me head in. But anyway, I'll see you at the end of this video. So the first question is, Luke, what glue should I use? Now, there's many glues you can use, PVA, wood glue, even super glue. And this does depend on what kit you're doing and the complexity. If I'm using like a box shape like this one, which is like a wooden barn, they usually hold themselves quite firm without any glue, but it's good to dry fit any kit, no matter how the complex it is, just to make sure that you are doing it correctly. Now, with a kit like this that does hold itself, all I do is I apply some super glue gel, some really thick super glue, down the seams, and then apply an activator just so it dries quickly so I can move on. You could use PVA or wood glue, but the thing is you'd have to put elastic bands around it and wait for it to dry over time, which can knock creativity because you're having to wait for things to dry before you paint them and things. With doing the base, I am doing it from underneath with super glue, so be careful when you're doing this if you're wanting it as a modular piece, because you're wanting it to be quite flat, so you don't want any uneven parts. The way I do this is just run the glue round and smooth it out so it's not undulated underneath, but these are going to be fixed to the board once they're finished, so I don't worry too much about that. Now, one thing people don't talk about when they talk about MDF kits is thinking about how you're going to play with it. I don't normally plan for gameplay, I'm more of a terrain builder, but for this gaming table I have to. Things like roofs, I'd normally just glue them on, but there is a playable space on the second floor. So this roof comes with some tabs that you can just glue in place and put them on so you can't knock the roof off when you're playing with it. But if you want to lift it off and pop a sniper in the building, it's possible. Some kits don't come with this option, but it's easy to fabricate your own little tabs. Now, the doors and things, there's no option for open and closing. I don't like swinging doors on small MDF kits like this because playing inside buildings is a bit cumbersome. So I've made it so the roof cam comes off so you can actually play inside, but the doors I'm just going to glue shut. One, it means I don't have to paint inside as amazingly as possible, but two, it just stops people trying to play through it and knock the terrain and everything else. It just means that they can put the models in if they're in the building and then take them out when they're ready. Now, the biggest question I get asked is, how do you paint MDF terrain? And the answer is no different to any other. People are worried you're going to fill in the laser etching of the detail, and this is not what happens. I just spray prime everything a base colour, whether that be black, whether that be grey, whether that be ivory, depending on the type of building. The thing that I do differently, especially on buildings like this where there's a lot of brickwork, rather than dry brushing and brushing with a paintbrush, I like to stipple on the effects with a sponge. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. MDF lacks texture. Now, you can go in there and add the texture yourself, but there's a risk you're going to change like all the etching lines and fill them in and make a mess. So what I do just to make it a lot simpler is I use the sponge to stipple on the paint. Now, the paint, with how you're stippling it on, adds that texture, and you'll see as they start to build up your lighter colours, you start to fake texture, which is a very nice way to do with your stone buildings. And the more you bring out different browns, greens, blues even, just add all your different colours and stipple them around. It simulates the bricks are all different colours and everything else. And you can see that texture just starting to pop out, even though it's not there. Now this is an absolute basics video. I'm not going to be texturing any of the woodwork or anything like that, but what you can do is just straight out the box is just put your base coats on of just brown paint and treat this like you would treat any other detail on a model. Base coat, wash, a bit of a dab to get rid of the excess wash, and pick out some highlights around like your stonework and things like that, and set the details to a more solid colour, and that way it just separates them from the rest of the work that you've done with the sponge. Now at this point you could say it's table ready, however I find it quite cartoony, so what I like to do at this point is put a gloss varnish on. Now I didn't have a gloss varnish in a spray can, so I'm just using some Winsor & Newton out of a pot and just brush it on. This doesn't make much of a difference apart from it's a little bit thicker, but it's a game piece, so it protects it well. Now the reason we're putting the gloss varnish on is we are going to be dampening the model in a second. To prove to people that you don't fill the etching lines in with paint, I'm going to put some sandless tile grout in there. This is ivory sandless tile grout. Just brush it on with a makeup brush, and this falls into all the gaps, and it also acts as a bit of a filter, and it dusts up the model and looks at it, adds a tiny amount of texture. All you've got to do once you've dusted it on is just wipe it very softly with a damp sponge, and that also glues that in place because the grout activates with moisture. Sometimes it will look a bit dusty after doing this, but just apply a damp sponge over it again and let that dry. And then give it an all over matte spray with a nice varnish, and once it's done, it'll look pretty cool. So there's nothing to be afraid of working with MDF Terrain, guys. Just paint it and enjoy it. And this is what you can achieve doing just the basics. The next videos though, however, are going to show you everything from interior, exterior textures, roof tiling, absolutely everything. If you've liked this video, drop a comment below, guys, and let me know what you think. I'll catch you in a bit. So guys, I hope you've liked this video. I know it's a bit basic and some of you might find this a bit, a bit too easy, but just painting with a sponge, spraying it and chucking some grout on there can turn a very basic MDF kit into something that's pretty reasonable. I mean, if you just chuck some cardboard tiles on top of that, it'd look at 10 times better again. So MDF Terrain, it's cheap. It can look very nice. The ones that I tend to go for personally, like the MDF ones, if they have got all the etching and everything, because you can throw grout on and extra details. But in the next video, there's some buildings that don't have that, and I'll show you how we can get around that as well. Alright guys? But if you've liked this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. If you want to support me, check all my links below where you can buy all my scenic materials for all your basic needs. Do use your local shops as well, guys, that sell our product. Do use your local shops as well, guys, that do sell our products, because that way you are supporting me and you're also supporting your local shops in a time where local shops have had it hard because of COVID and everything. So if you can find your shop locally, use your local shops, and the shops are worldwide now. Alright guys, so thanks for watching, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week for some serious MDF terrain building. I'm actually really excited about this because I get to play with interior and exteriors. But more on that next week. Love, love, love.